No doubt about it. This is weird.
They came in very fast into the room, heading toward me. I don't know where they came from.
It's quite natural to wonder about our place in the universe. To suggest that we're alone is inexcusably egocentric.
The flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
The federal government knows fully well what is taking place.
The task is to debunk the UFOs and anybody who believes in them. Get this UFO thing out of the newspapers.
All right, you tell me where it is.
I know what I saw. It was something that is not from here.
I'm freaking out. I'm like, what the heck is this?
I reached over and I touched his craft.
If even one of these sightings is correct, it is perhaps the greatest event in all of human history.
Tonight, UFOs, seeing is believing. Now, reporting from New Mexico, David Muir.
Good evening from the middle of the desert in New Mexico, where here 27 massive radio telescopes scan space day and night, studying the stars and the planets, some of which might have life. Just this summer, NASA scientists celebrated one of their most dazzling discoveries yet. They found water on Mars. And they have long said that that's the key to answering the question, could there be life out there, or are we alone? More than 80 million Americans are already convinced we're not. They believe we've already been visited by aliens from outer space. And more than 40 million Americans say they have seen or they know someone who has seen an unidentified flying object, a UFO. Peter Jennings first explored these sightings nearly 4 years ago, and tonight we report what's new. And we examine some of those eyewitness accounts that really stuck with us. And before you dismiss what they have to say, you'll learn, as we did, for so many, seeing is believing.
It was a white light, a round orb of light, unlike any light that you've ever seen.
If you believe that UFOs are spacecraft guided by intelligent beings from beyond Earth, you have probably spent a few late nights listening to the radio program Coast to Coast AM. It remains the place to talk about UFOs, or ufology, as many listeners call it. Art Bell was the show's original host.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hi.
Hey, Art. This is Matt in Colorado.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, got a sighting for you. It happened last summer.
The common cause of ufology is to finally determine what in the hell is flying in our skies.
It hurt your eyes, so I turned away.
Like a circular thing with a whole bunch of lights on it.
I've had 5 different sightings here in the last year.
It was really weird.
Like they were doing a dance?
Yeah.
And I saw 3 black objects.
All it takes is for one person to see something that they cannot explain, and a new ufologist is born.
More than a dozen ufologists were born just this year, when the Texas town of Stephenville became a hotspot for UFO sightings. Steve Allen, a pilot with more than 20 years of experience in the air, was sitting with his friend, watching the sunset.
The date was January the 8th, 2008. Unlimited visibility, you could see forever, totally quiet, no cars, airplanes, anything that afternoon. I just lit my cigar, looked off to the east, see some very intense bright lights coming this way at a high rate of speed. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. There were 7 lights flashing, and the lights reconfigured to an arch shape, and then they reconfigured again, and then they split with 2 sets of vertical lights. And then they burst into a very unusual bright white flame. 2 or 3 seconds of that, and then it simply disappeared. 10 minutes after the first time we saw it, we ran back outside, and it was coming back again from the west to the east, basically towards Crawford or Bush's house back that way. It had 2 round red orbs in the back of it. About 3 seconds later, here comes 2 F-16s in pursuit of it. It acted like it was toying with them. They couldn't catch it, and they headed off towards the president's house that way. So where they was going or what, I don't know.
Looked off in the northwestern sky as I'm about to make this curve. Seen 2 extremely bright lights. I'd never seen nothing like this before in my life. Real bright. And they were together for a few seconds. Next thing I know, they split. One went north, the other one went south. Never seen them again.
My wife and I left this store, approached the intersection of Grand Avenue here, and in the process of looking to the left for traffic, I noticed 2 white lights come up from behind the red light. Didn't think a whole lot of it. We proceeded to cross the road, and I looked again. 3 more lights joined them. And we watched them for about a minute, and then they just went out.
Constable Leroy Gayton is an elected official charged with keeping the peace in Erath County.
Over that tree line across the highway, something caught my attention. I looked, and it was like what I described to be a red orb. Just as soon as I saw it, it disappeared.
Constable Gayton went inside to tell his family and returned outside with his son Ryan.
And I looked in that same direction, and instead we saw these white lights. There was no particular formation, but they were moving around. Me and my boy counted them. I believe I counted 9. He said he counted 10. I don't remember. But after probably a couple minutes, they all just shot off. They were out of sight within 2 to 3 seconds. These things were not making a noise like a plane or a jet. But later on, we did see 2 jets coming from that direction, going in the same path as these lights.
This was not just John Doe out in his car thinking he saw something. This was multiple citizens within a narrow geographic area and within a narrow time frame seeing something.
UFO investigator Robert Powell obtained radar data from the FAA, which was recorded in the area on that January day.
The FAA radar data that we have definitely indicates that there was an object in the sky. There's no doubt about that. This object was on radar for over an hour. There were 3 different times where we found radar data that matched up with what an eyewitness had told us. So we know the object was there. The question becomes exactly what was the object.
I don't think it's from Earth, whatever it is. It'd be pure speculation. I would say it was from somewhere besides here.
I'm not gonna say little green men, but might have been something they rode in.
When we come back, a UFO sighting by thousands caught on videotape.
All right, you tell me what it is.
And later in the broadcast, the people who are convinced that they've come face to face with aliens.
She pulled the baby away from me and said, "No, this baby is ours."
March 1997, Phoenix, Arizona.
There were some incredible sightings over Phoenix called the Phoenix Lights, and they occurred while I was doing my program. I took call after call after call of people in Phoenix saying, "Oh my God, what's flying over our city?"
It was 8:30 at night, and hundreds of people reported seeing something mysterious flying in the sky. Security guard Bob Nelson was sitting on his porch with his dog.
All at once, these 6 or 7 lights came across the top of the hill, and it was moving very slow. And then I went in and jokingly said to my wife, "We got a UFO coming over." She just couldn't believe what she seen. I mean, and of course, she didn't know what she seen.
Sue Watson and her children, Brian, Aaron, and Kevin, were in their front yard.
We saw this incredible sized vehicle. There were 5 huge lights in the very front of it, and it was in a boomerang shape. I'm only 1.5 miles from that mountain, the top of that mountain. That vehicle spent 5 to 6 minutes hovering from that mountain to my house. I don't know anything that can go that slow.
Sheriff's Deputy Thomas Chavez was in his squad car.
I can't give you a definite answer as to what it was. All I can tell you of what it was not, and it was definitely not an aircraft as we know it.
Mike Fortson grabbed his binoculars and went outside with his wife.
As it passed in front of us, all we could see was the left wing of the craft itself. That's how low it was. We didn't go fetch a camera. We didn't do anything but sit there and watch it. You actually tell yourself not to blink because you might miss something. I mean, that's how intense it was. It gives me goosebumps when I talk about it.
And at 10 p.m., thousands more reported seeing another series of lights in the sky.
What I'm looking at here is a light on South Mountain.
With his own camera in hand, Mike Kristen captures the lights from his home on Moon Mountain.
When I saw the one light, it was one thing. I was just photographing the one light, and then all of a sudden another one popped up in a different direction. So then I trained the camera on that light, and then another one popped up, and before you know it, this whole thing is starting to happen in front of my eyes, and I'm going, wait, this is something.
All right, you tell me what it is.
James McGahey is a retired Air Force pilot, an astronomer, and an outspoken skeptic about UFOs, especially the Phoenix Lights.
The lights on the videotape were simply flares being dropped by A-10s on the Goldwater test range. There's nothing mysterious about it. I know what flares look like. These are clearly flares. And some people have said they saw a triangular aircraft flying through the Phoenix airspace. The argument against that is very simple. The Phoenix radar didn't see anything. They were connecting the dots of these objects. That's all they were doing. The bright lights of these objects, they were connecting this and saying it's all one thing. It wasn't one thing. It was 5 different aircraft flying in formation.
For somebody to say there were planes in formation, I'm telling them I saw a solid object. My wife saw a solid object. I know 300 or 400 people that I've talked to saw the solid object in the 8 o'clock hour.
I am so certain at what I saw that I would testify in a court of law or in a congressional hearing as to what I saw, because what I saw was not an aircraft.
I think it was a UFO. I honestly believe that there was a UFO. You don't have to believe me. Nobody believes it. But you'll believe it when you see it.
Ufologists argue that the sheer volume of UFO sightings is proof that intelligent beings exist and are visiting Earth. But for most scientists, seeing is not believing. Only physical evidence convinces them.
My intuition tells me that life is a natural phenomenon in the universe, but there's no facts to support that intuition yet.
NASA scientist Chris McKay has spent decades looking for that first conclusive proof that simple life, microbes, exist beyond Earth. He calls himself an astrobiologist.
You can think of astrobiology as combining astronomy and biology, looking at life on Earth and looking at the stars and asking, is there life up in the stars? Is life only on Earth, or is life throughout the universe? That is essentially the question of astrobiology.
McKay studies life in California's Mojave Desert, looking for clues to how life might have once existed on a dry, barren planet like Mars.
There's the algae. There's clearly. I know that there was life here. I can reach down in the soil and pull it up and analyze it and find evidence that there was life here when there was water here. I'd like to do the same thing on Mars.
We have ignition and liftoff.
In August 2007, NASA sent a spacecraft, the Phoenix Lander, on a mission to Mars to find proof of water. McKay helped design the mission's goals.
Water is the quintessential requirement for life. All life on Earth needs water to grow or reproduce, so it makes sense that when we're going to other planets, we would go where we find evidence of water.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, mark.
After almost 10 months and more than 400 million miles, Phoenix arrived at Mars and began its descent.
100 meters, 80 meters, 20 meters, 50 meters, standing by for touchdown. Touchdown signal detected.
Peter Smith is the principal investigator of the Phoenix mission.
I was in the control room at the Jet Propulsion Lab, and it was such a great thrill. We started a great mission. We've been going all summer doing our primary science, and we're well on our way to answering our questions about habitability on Mars. Since we can't put our boots on and grab a shovel and go take a dig on Mars, we send a robot, and it's really returning some marvelous data.
After just a few months of digging, Phoenix found what it was looking for.
For us, it's a huge discovery to know that we'd found ice within reach of our robotic arm. And not only found ice, but able to make a real detailed scientific proof that this is water ice and not some other material.
Physical evidence of water on another planet, even in the form of ice, is an unprecedented scientific discovery. It implies that Mars could have been habitable once. Finding a Martian fossil might be next.
If we look in our backyard, cosmic backyard, if we look in the soils of Mars and find life, imagine what that tells us. That some other random place that happens to be a nearby planet has life just the way we do. Then there's no telling how rich the entire universe is with life.
A universe full of life. Scientists say it is possible, but the bigger question is, could there be intelligent life? And have extraterrestrials already visited Earth? When we come back tonight, the pilots, the police officers, convinced they've seen something.
It was absolutely crazy. Crazy.
Tonight, almost 10 billion miles from where I'm standing, is Voyager 1, a probe shot out to space by NASA more than 30 years ago, hurtling through the cosmos. But after 3 decades of travel, it still hasn't made it beyond our solar system. It takes a long time to get anywhere in space. So we wonder, if it's taken us so long to travel through space, how in the world could those UFOs get here?
Some people slam the door on the question of other civilizations visiting the Earth because distances are so far away. I say, not so fast. Evolution and the final death of the universe.
Dr. Michio Kaku is one of the world's leading theoretical physicists.
You know, in school, we learned that a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. But actually, that's not true. You see, if you fold the sheet of paper and punch a hole through it, you begin to realize that a wormhole is the shortest distance between 2 points. This is a wormhole. Only those civilizations, millions of years ahead of ours, have the ability perhaps to open gateways through space and time to go these enormous distances in a blink of an eye.
So of the thousands of UFOs reported every year, is it possible that one of them is actually intelligent life from another planet?
All right, you tell me what it is.
Trying to identify unidentified flying objects is a tricky business. Good evidence is hard to come by. Video and photos are unreliable and easily altered. Radar is often inconclusive.
We're probably missing a lot of
It almost always comes down to the eyewitness reports.
The craft is disc-shaped, probably bigger than a 747,
and it arced over the top of our car. Then there was a third object even behind the first two.
I mean, one of the first things we do, we look at what's the credibility of the witness. There were objects of unknown origin.
Robert Powell investigates sightings for the Mutual UFO Network.
Where were the stars at night? Where were the planets? Were there jets in the air? Eliminate the sighting as a possible identified. And most of the time, that's the case. But when we're done with that, then you're left with the unexplained.
One conjecture is that many reports these days are caused by secret aircraft.
Dr. Mark Rodiger is a researcher at the Center for UFO Studies.
When you get a UFO sighting where the object behaves in a way that defies the way that an airplane would move, and that thing isn't shaped like an airplane, well, then it's not a secret aircraft. It's whatever it is, it's just something totally bizarre and strange.
Some of the most compelling eyewitness accounts come from commercial and military pilots.
I was flying a trip from San Francisco to Boston, non-stop in a DC-10.
It was an Airbus 320, and we had 24 passengers on board with very good condition. We were at 39,000 feet.
I noticed a red light of some kind to the far, the distance off our port side, our right side. It just was gliding through the sky so quietly. It just reminded me of a submarine in the depths when it's quiet and just kind of motoring right on through, you know.
I watched this big, gigantic light go out behind our left wingtip, and then as the turn progressed, it disappeared in the distance off to the back at a very high rate of speed.
It was not a plane, it was not a weather balloon. It was huge, absolutely huge. It was dark red color. And so this object began to become transparent and it disappeared. It was absolutely crazy. Crazy.
One of the biggest problems in this field is the baggage that the term UFO carries with it.
UFO investigator Nick Pope says many sightings go unreported because the eyewitness is afraid they'll become the target of jokes from family, friends, and coworkers too, even late-night talk show hosts.
Do you hear about this? It was a UFO was seen by hundreds of people yesterday. Some of them filmed it. They've actually got actual film it. We've got some of the clips here. Let's have a look at the film.
And the fear of ridicule is a problem in the UFO community. I think the way around it is to give more prominence to these sorts of cases where the witnesses are police officers and military.
A report of a UFO sighting from a police officer is often considered highly credible.
Reference just received a call from Highland PD. Reference to a truck driver just stopped in and said there was a flying object in the area of Lebanon.
It's a joke, right?
No, this is not a joke.
10-4 now.
In this case, in southern Illinois, the UFO was seen by 5 police officers.
Be advised, there's a very bright white light east of town, and it keeps changing colors. It's heading westbound now. Matter of fact, if the shadow officer looks up, they can probably see it by now. 2550. I see something, but I don't know what the heck it is.
I happened to look over and saw this large floating object that was just moving very slowly. It was probably about a football field in length. It had 3 large, bright lights lighting up the sky underneath it.
I was driving eastbound on Highway 50 when I see the object, the UFO, if you will. I first thought it was probably a bunch of helicopters flying in some type of formation. It was unlike anything I have ever seen before. You could see the lights, and you could see something that they were attached to, and it was shaped like a triangle. I'm freaking out. I'm like, what the heck is this? I duck into this left turn lane here, and I stop right about here. I wanted to listen to see if I could hear any type of engine noise. I could not hear anything. I tried to look again at the UFO, and it had already gone behind these trees. I put it in reverse to back up a couple seconds to see if I could reacquire it again. By the time I backed up and tried to see it, it had moved at least a mile away, if not further. That quick. I was just astonished. I didn't know what to say. I was speechless.
Police officers, pilots, people from every walk of life, seeing lights and objects no one can identify, maneuvering in ways that no one can explain. Experiences that can make even the most skeptical person consider the possibility.
It very well could be an alien ship. You know, I don't know. I guess that's why they call them unidentified objects. You know, I don't know. I do know that it wasn't a plane that I've ever seen before.
When we come back,
I reached over and I touched this craft.
The NATO officer, and perhaps the closest encounter yet. And later, those tales of alien abductions.
I really, literally thought I was going to die.
And would you believe it? Yes, it's true. Unidentified flying objects have been sighted over London.
UFOs are not just an American phenomenon, it is international. Every year, there are thousands of sightings reported around the world.
30 ans de recherche, de collecte de documents.
Recently, for the first time, both the French and the British governments released their UFO files to the public.
The files went up on the National Archives website. Within 2 weeks, there had been around 2 million downloads.
Nick Pope investigated hundreds of UFO sightings for the British government.
As I began to encounter some of the fascinating cases, and as I began to delve back through the archive of previous files, I began to think, with a small percentage of these cases, there is something going on.
One unsolved case stood out above all the rest.
The Bentwaters incident, Britain's most famous UFO case. I launched a sort of cold case review, really looking at the file, seeing what we knew, seeing what we'd missed.
80 miles northeast of London lies the former United States Air Force base called Bentwaters. On December 26, 1980, the chief of security for the base, Staff Sergeant James Peniston, received an urgent call.
And they said, I need to get out to the East Gate immediately. And I said, what exactly is going on out there? And they said, well, we might have a possible aircraft downing just adjacent to the East Gate. On the walk toward the aircraft itself, I realized it wasn't a downed aircraft of anything I've seen. I was trying to keep my composure because I was with a younger airman, and he was panicking. And I tried to calm him down. I said, no, we gotta stay on task here. I says, we gotta find out what this is, see if it's a threat.
As Staff Sergeant Benison walked in a circle around the object, he took out this notebook and wrote these notes.
Skin of craft, fabric black, smooth, glass-like, surface unknown, identity unknown, size 9 feet long, approximately 7 to 8 feet high, no apparent landing gear, no sound.
He made these sketches of some strange symbols he found on the object.
Identifying markings are on left front side. The symbols etched or engraved. Language unknown. When I got to the part where there was symbols on the side of the craft, I couldn't help myself. I reached over and I touched this craft. Skin and fabric, warm to touch. I was just completely awed. I said, what in the world do I have here?
Then, in an instant, it was gone.
Liftoff 2:45. No sound, no air disturbance. Takeoff speed, unknown, impossible. I turned to the patrolman and I says, how are we gonna explain this?
They came back with some very, very wild tales.
Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt was the deputy base commander.
When I initially interviewed them, they gave me a good description of the craft and some sketches, but they didn't tell me that one or two of them actually got right up to the craft and literally touched the craft. I think they were afraid to admit they were that close.
2 nights later, another UFO was reported to have landed in the woods just outside the base. And this time, Colonel Charles Halt himself assembled a team to investigate. They made this recording of the radio communication.
We found a small blast, what looks like a blasted or struck up area here.
We searched around and on through the forest with lights, and we found this site where something had allegedly landed. There were 3 indentations in the ground. So we put some stakes in the ground and we were marking off and going to do some sketches when one of the officers noticed something odd across the field and said, look over there.
Where? Right at this position here. Watch, straight ahead off my flash right there. There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it?
Bright red, very, very bright red, oval in shape and with a black center, just like an eye. And it moved through the trees. It actually moved through the trees.
It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
Then I really became concerned. What is this? And the stress level went way up, I can tell you. And as we approached the fence, the object silently exploded, is the best way I can describe it, into white objects, small white objects, and they just dispersed, and they were gone.
This is a very important event with multiple witnesses, trained military witnesses, physical evidence in terms of indentations in the ground where this thing landed on the first night.
Both the American and British Air Forces denied that anything significant took place on those 2 nights at Bentwaters.
I concluded that the original investigation was mishandled. This was arguably our best chance to really get a handle on this.
Nobody ever came to talk to me. Nobody ever said anything. Nobody ever told me don't talk. Nothing seemed to happen. It's sort of like it didn't happen.
They look something like a pie plate.
When we come back, you'll hear from the first eyewitness and the case that started it all.
I'd be glad to confirm it with my hands on a Bible because I did see it.
And later, the 4 retired U.S. airmen who to this day stand by their incredible story.
At that point, I was fairly sure that I was looking at an alien spaceship.
For decades, the public appetite has been enormous when it comes to UFOs and the idea of other life out there. There have been so many movies, E.T., Independence Day. Part of the movie Contact with Jodie Foster was shot right here. But the government hasn't always been as enthused, as intrigued as the people. And to understand why, you have to go back to the beginning, the late 1940s, and that first flying saucer. The fascination with UFOs can be traced back to one day in June 1947 and to one man, Kenneth Arnold.
He was not a guy with a lot of imagination. He lived pretty close to the ground mentally, but he loved to fly. And so on the Tuesday afternoon of June 24th, 1947, when he saw these 9 dish-shaped objects flying at some considerable speed over Mount Rainier, he thought that he was witnessing a secret military experiment.
Every newspaper across the nation has made headlines out of it, and this afternoon we are honored indeed to have here in our studio Kenneth Arnold, who we believe may be able to give us a first-hand account and give you the same on what happened. Go ahead, Kenneth.
They looked something like a pie plate that was cut in half with a sort of a convex triangle in the rear. I'd be glad to confirm it with my hands on a Bible because I did see it. It's just as much a mystery to me as it is to everyone else who's been calling me the last 24 hours wondering what it was.
Newspapers at the time called the 9 objects Arnold saw flying saucers.
Arnold's sighting just seemed to catalyze everything. All of a sudden, there was this presence of something unidentified in the sky that couldn't be ignored. And in the next 2 or 3 weeks, there were many hundreds of sightings.
Army fighter planes are on patrol for flying saucers.
So many objects were being seen in the sky by so many people that the Army Air Force launched an investigation.
When it appeared that technological devices of some kind were penetrating American airspace, and we didn't know what they were and had no idea what to do about them, this was obviously a national security problem.
It was the beginning of the Cold War, and what Americans feared most was an attack by the Soviet Union.
We didn't know what they might have flying. And so those concerns by the government, legitimate concerns by the government for our security, led eventually to them establishing a full-time office to investigate UFOs.
The Air Force investigators quickly came to realize that they were not dealing with Soviet aircraft. Nothing man-made performed like flying saucers. In a remarkable top-secret report to General Hoyt Vandenberg, the Air Force's chief of staff, the investigator said the Earth was in fact being visited by alien spaceships.
Hoyt Vandenberg looked at this thing and he said, I cannot accept this. I cannot accept this kind of conclusion because you don't have concrete proof that that's what kind of a device we're dealing with.
The Air Force wanted the flying saucer phenomena to go away, but the popular fascination with mysterious flying objects was growing. In 1952, the Air Force received more UFO reports than any other year in history.
The sky is the stage, the actors, so-called flying saucers. And they're back on the scene with some new twists.
This is a photograph of a flying saucer taken by myself, and it reminded me of 2 straw hats stuck together at the brim.
I saw an intensely bright, white-green object in the sky. Whatever it was an object and not an illusion.
By the summer of 1952, there was an enormous wave of sightings. There were hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of sightings. Most alarmingly, the sightings were focused on Washington, D.C.
The number of calls of frightened Americans, hysterical Americans coming into the switchboards of the American government were clogging communication channels. And if American communication channels were clogged, then this would leave America vulnerable to a potential Soviet attack. So the task is calm the Fuhrer, end the hysteria.
So flying saucers, whatever they were, wherever they came from, were now to be made the subject of ridicule. And this job was given to the Air Force and its UFO office called Project Blue Book.
Blue Book was tasked with a public relations mission, and that mission was denounce the UFOs, dismiss the UFOs, debunk the UFOs, and anybody who believes in them. Just come up with answers and get this UFO thing out of the newspapers.
The best way to keep UFOs out of the newspapers, and therefore out of the public mind, was to say repeatedly that they were nothing more than weather balloons or rare atmospheric conditions, a star on the horizon, whatever it took. In 1969, after 22 years and thousands of investigations, the U.S. government closed down Project Blue Book and finally got out of the business of trying to explain UFOs. Later, those tales of alien abductions.
They came in very fast into the room, heading toward me.
With NASA's most recent discovery of water on Mars, scientists believe they are the closest yet to discovering the first concrete proof of life beyond Earth, and confirming what they have long believed, that the universe is in fact rich with life.
There's more than 100 billion stars in our Milky Way galaxy alone. And there's more than 50 or 100 billion galaxies in the universe. You multiply these two numbers, that's a 1 with 21 zeros worth of stars in the cosmos. To suggest that we're alone is inexcusably egocentric.
Somewhere among the billions of stars in our galaxy, or in the billions of other galaxies in the vastness of space, most scientists believe there must be other planets like Earth, where other intelligent life exists, where another developed civilization could be trying to reach us. Dr. Frank Drake has been listening for them for almost 50 years. In 1960, in Green Bank, West Virginia, he first pointed his radio telescope at a nearby star to listen for a signal.
We just had this feeling that something very important was starting, that this was a new road that human beings were taking that was going to lead to very wonderful places and very wonderful things for our civilization.
Dr. Drake's experiment marked the beginning of a project called SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Today, Dr. Seth Shostak works with Dr. Drake at the SETI Institute.
We've been broadcasting our existence to the universe for the last 50 or 60 years, and we've been doing that with our high-powered radio and television transmissions. Every day, those signals just go right on out into space. That's how we're broadcasting into space, and we kind of turn that idea around when we try and find the extraterrestrials by trying to find their broadcasts.
In the movie Contact, Jodie Foster plays a SETI researcher who finds a signal. Foster's character was based on the work of Dr. Jill Tarter.
The chances of success in SETI are difficult to estimate. But if we never search, the chance is 0. So I think what we ought to do is search.
Seth, you can see the telescopes.
Oh, yeah.
The two shiny.
Yep. I see them.
At Hat Creek in Northern California, SETI is building a vast array of telescopes with money from Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. They have already begun to search for alien signals on a scale never attempted before.
All right, let's go.
This observatory is sited in a very quiet pastoral valley, mostly cows and a few people. It's going to change a whole lot when we put 350 telescopes in here, and it's going to change even more if indeed those telescopes detect a signal from someone else's technology.
Of course, we don't know how many civilizations out there might be broadcasting signals that we could pick up. The faster that you can go through all that heavenly real estate, the sooner you're going to find a signal. And if that happens, this is where it will happen. It'll happen right here. This is kind of the portal to the cosmos. This is the place where we're going to crack the crystal of isolation that has surrounded this planet for 4.5 billion years. Right here amongst the trees and the lava and the bright sunshine.
And drink a little champagne along the way.
But some ufologists ask why these researchers are searching for a signal from space when the aliens have already been here.
If I thought that extraterrestrials were really visiting the Earth, I wouldn't be doing this. None of us would be. Why would we go to all the trouble of building this very complex equipment and these expensive antenna arrays and so forth and so on if they were here?
It's just not proven that any UFO is a spacecraft from another intelligent species.
If we claim something, there will be data to back it up.
Doggone it, we're going to tell you it's up there at these coordinates in the sky. It's at this spot on the dial at this frequency, so take out your own antenna and go out and verify it. We would encourage you to verify it.
Right ascension, 18 hours, 36 minutes, 56.2 seconds.
That's the difference between science and myth-making.
When we come back, the people who say they have made contact, the stories of alien abduction.
It's really, really disturbing to be in a room with something that isn't supposed to exist.
This from our ABC stations.
So far tonight, we have chronicled the many UFO sightings in this country, and it seems the number of stories is endless. But there are also the believers who take it a step further, much further. For them, it was far more than just a sighting. They say they were abducted by aliens.
We're perfectly normal people. We're probably your coworkers, your family, or your friends, and we're having quite extraordinary experiences. And we're all trying to understand what's happening to us, who's doing it, and why.
I had gone down to bed that night when 4 of these beings came into my house. I don't know where they came from or how, but they came in very fast into the room, heading toward me. And then they were all down the side of my bed, 4 of them, again, to my right. I turned to face them. I mean, I really, literally thought I was gonna die. They appeared very cold. It's really, really disturbing to be in a room with something that isn't supposed to exist. I was taken on the craft. I was brought to some very contained room. I can't talk about what was done there because it's too personal. It's just unbelievable.
They're in my room.
They're in the room.
The 2 are on my left.
2 on the left?
Yeah, they're with me again. They're on my left.
They're there.
Bud Hopkins has spent nearly 30 years exploring his belief that aliens are among us and have been abducting people.
And what do they look like?
4 foot tall, 4.5 foot tall.
He's an artist who has sketched and recorded story after story of people being taken onto spaceships and then returned to Earth with their memories clouded.
The person may remember the beginning of an experience and the ending, but they don't remember what happened in between. And they're quite tormented by this.
In most cases, Hopkins uses hypnosis in what he says is a way to connect the person to memories that have allegedly been repressed.
You're in bed. 1, this is a long time ago. We're just going to see what it was. 2, right on the edge. 3.
He's looking at me very closely. I'm saying he, but I don't know. It feels like a he.
One of the things, of course, that caught my attention from the very beginning was the similarity of these cases and the details that were coming up over and over again.
It was very tall, probably about 7 foot tall.
Very tall and very thin and very scary, and sometimes almost like an insect, very frightening to me.
And I found myself in this room, and I was lying on this stretcher, and this being, I don't even know how to say this, he started to put my legs apart.
They put like a jock strap on you of some sort with a tube attached to it, and it runs to a machine, and they somehow extract sperm. I don't know how they do it.
And this female brought a baby, and she sort of handed him to me. And I instantly said, this baby is mine. I know he's mine. She pulled the baby away from me and said, no, this baby is ours.
So 5, you're starting to wake up. 4, waking up. 3, almost awake. 2, 1, fully awake. I'm glad we did that.
Yeah.
We didn't know those things.
Yeah.
It is Hopkins who has convinced a large part of the UFO community that the abduction phenomenon is real. He has published books, magazine articles, and made public appearances. Abduction has been a common theme in movies and television. Steven Spielberg has used these stories often. Popular culture is full of them. And psychologists say these images can easily be drawn out by hypnosis.
The problem with hypnosis is people are using it as a technique to retrieve memories of alien abductions, but most likely what's emerging is the product of fantasy and of suggestion. I mean, hypnosis isn't magic.
Dr. Susan Clancy and other psychologists at Harvard have worked with the abductees and think a common sleep disorder can explain much of their abduction experience.
The subjects that we interviewed, when we asked them, how did this all begin? They described an experience that sounds strikingly like sleep paralysis.
What happens is you wake up, usually it's in the middle of the night, and you feel terrified. You're paralyzed, overwhelmed with fear. People report feeling the presence of something in the room, or you might sort of see shapes or lights. It's a very common experience.
I'll be in bed and I will somehow sense fear. I'll sense something in the room, and at some point, I can't move.
I couldn't move my head left or right, but I could kind of look down at the foot of the bed, and I saw people standing at the foot of my bed.
These sorts of episodes have been reported throughout history and throughout cultures. The incubi, the succubi, the demons that used to visit people in the Middle Ages. But in our subjects, these visitors in the bedroom were interpreted as aliens.
Aliens and spaceships, stories that powerfully resonate today, whether on film or in sleep.
And finally, these individuals, our subjects, will often go to hypnotherapists, often who believe in such things, and will then hypnotize them and do so-called regression sessions, where they'll take the person back to the moment where they were paralyzed in bed and try to find out what happened next. At that point, you get these quote-unquote memories emerging of being taken out of the bedroom, through the window, up into a spaceship, being experimented upon by these alien beings, participating in hybrid breeding and all sorts of other exotic adventures. And so, at this point, you've got yourself an alien abductee.
But abductees reject any psychological explanation. They believe their experiences are real.
You know, it's not some vague apparition or something. These guys were three-dimensionally in the room with me.
These people were moved and terrified and touched by their memories and what they believe happened to them, and that's why they believe. I think if I had recovered a memory like that, I'd have a hard time disbelieving it too.
If this is real, it has to do with every single one of us, and we need to know more. I mean, there needs to be more questions asked, more. It's important, because there is life in the universe, and we're babies.
When we come back, aliens, the flying saucer that crashed, was there a government cover-up at Roswell? About 215 miles to the east of here is the town of Roswell, New Mexico. It was there in 1947, the story goes, that the U.S. government collected the wreckage from a flying saucer that crashed there. For most ufologists, the Roswell story is an article of faith. But many believe it's much more than that the government is actually holding concrete proof. For those who believe we have already been visited by extraterrestrial spacecraft, this patch of remote desert in New Mexico remains hallowed ground.
Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer at the Army Air Base in Roswell, receives a telephone call. The call is to go to the ranch of Mac Brazel and investigate some material that Brazel has found on his land. Marcel goes to the ranch and brings back a load of debris. And this stuff was extraordinary. Jesse Marcel was absolutely convinced what he found was extraterrestrial, that the debris was nothing of this earth.
The morning after Major Marcel made that find, he took the debris back with him to the Army Air Force Base at Roswell. And by noon that same day, the base commander had already issued a press release with the bold claim that one of his own officers had found a flying saucer.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
But almost as soon as they announced that extraordinary find, the Air Force changed its story.
The next day, there was a press conference organized by General Roger Ramey. And Roger Ramey says, we did not recover a flying saucer. This is no flying disc. What we recovered was a weather balloon.
It was a complete 180. The papers were now reporting that the general empties Roswell saucer, reducing the discovery to nothing more than a harmless high-altitude weather balloon.
The public accepted it. There was very little skepticism about it, and it just kind of went away.
30 years would go by with no one paying any attention to the events at Roswell until Jesse Marcel was willing to retell his story long after retiring from the military. And his was quite a story to tell.
What I saw, I couldn't believe there was so much of it. It was scattered over such a vast area. It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of.
It had been decades since that crash, and so there was no way to prove Jesse Marcel's claims. But it did open the door for all of those believers.
If there has been a UFO cover-up, it began in Roswell, New Mexico. A persistent rumor holds that the United States government has recovered and is concealing fragments of alien spacecraft and more.
This all came together at a time when people were ready to buy into conspiracy. And then, in 1989, Unsolved Mysteries did the recreation of the whole event, and off to the races we go.
This Air Force base here in Roswell, New Mexico.
Witnesses would come out of the woodwork claiming a government cover-up. And now the story would change. Not only was there an alien spacecraft, there were aliens too.
Eyes like this. About how tall? About 5'3", 5'4".
Extraterrestrials were found in Roswell?
Yes.
Dead?
Dead extraterrestrials were found, no question about it. After investigating for their new book,
What was going on here? Why was the story changing? Well, there was a lot of money to be made here.
Aliens, the federal government, intimidation, we have a bestseller on our hands. But your book is only going to sell if your charges are more grandiose, more exaggerated, more powerful. So you have this ladder of escalation of sensationalism.
In 1995, Fox Television aired what it said was film of an alien autopsy performed at Roswell. Later, it was determined to be a hoax, but it had already been seen by more than 20 million viewers.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
So what is the truth? Aware of the extraordinary interest, the government, as recently as 1997, revealed that it did know more. It wasn't a simple weather balloon, but it wasn't an alien spacecraft either.
The conclusion of the first report left no doubt that what was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947 was debris from a formerly top-secret Army Air Forces research project, codenamed Mogul.
Project Mogul. This was the first the public had heard of this. So secret, it had the same security classification as the project to build the atomic bomb. The Air Force was now saying that these high-altitude balloons had instrumentation and were designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. They were enormous, as long as 650 feet. And in 1947, nothing else on Earth looked like this.
When I began to look at the reports from that project and see the kinds of materials that were used, weather balloons, aluminum foil-covered radar targets that had struts that had funny little markings in purple and pink all over them. And then I took a look at the descriptions of the genuine debris that was found. It all matched. It all fit.
We're confident once the report is out and digested by the public that this will be the final word on the Roswell incident.
But it was not. And to this day, Roswell's true believers don't buy it. On the 50th anniversary of the alleged crash, 65% of Americans told the Time magazine CNN poll that they believe the Roswell story. And the crowds still come to celebrate the place where that alleged flying saucer crashed.
I think that Roswell has become an article of faith for many people. It happened, and that's all there is to it, and don't confuse me with the facts.
When we come back, the B-52 pilots convinced there was something flying beside them one October night.
This thing was climbing out with us, maintaining the same heading we were. That was unusual.
I've heard from dozens of Americans who say they have seen UFOs, something otherworldly in the skies. some perhaps more convincing than others. But you have yet to hear from this group. 4 retired members of the United States Air Force, once trusted to secure and fly nuclear missiles. 4 men who to this day stand by what they saw in the skies one October night. During the Cold War across much of the northern United States, the Air Force kept ballistic missiles and B-52 bombers on constant alert. On the night of October 24th, 1968, at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, Airman First Class Mike O'Connor was on his way to make a routine repair at one of those missile sites.
We made our turn to come down the road to the missile site, and out of the corner of my eye, I observed what I thought was a farmer's yard light, but it looked awful bright. As we proceeded down the road, the object appeared to lift off the ground and parallel us down the road until we came to the missile site, at which point we got out of the truck and it just kind of hovered there.
Staff Sergeant Bill Smith was in charge of security for 10 nuclear missiles. He saw something that night too.
These objects would rise, they would speed up, they would slow it down, they would hover, they would dart very quickly one way or the other. We were just not really sure that these were things that we could explain.
The Minot control tower diverted a B-52 to investigate. Captain Brad Runyon was the B-52's co-pilot.
The air traffic controller asked us if we would mind going out to this one area and looking for something. I was curious, and I said, well, what are we looking for? And they said, well, you'll know it if you find it.
The navigator on the B-52, Captain Patrick McCaslin, suddenly identified an object on his radar screen.
I saw a return, faint one sweep, bright the next, large, off our right wing, 3 o'clock, at about 3 miles. And at that point, I asked the radar navigator to turn on the camera, which would then take pictures of whatever was on the radar screen.
These pictures of the radar screen show that object flying in formation with the B-52.
This thing was climbing out with us and maintaining the same heading we were. That was unusual. But what really watered my eyes when this thing backed away and allowed us to turn inside of it.
When the object suddenly disappeared from the radar, the bomber was told to turn back to find it, and co-pilot Runyon was the first to spot what appeared to be a glowing craft hovering near the ground.
When things like that are happening, it seems like time just stands still. My estimate, overall object was a minimum of 200 feet in diameter, and it was hundreds of feet long. It had a metallic cylinder attached to another section that was shaped like a crescent moon. I felt that this crescent moon part was probably the command center. I tried to look inside the thing, but all I could see was a yellow glow. At that point, I was fairly sure that I was looking at an alien spaceship, something that had come here from some other planet other than Earth.
When the B-52 returned to base, the crew was quick to report what they had seen. But it would turn out they were not alone. 16 witnesses on the ground would also tell Air Force investigators that they too saw a UFO that night. Still, in the final report, the Air Force concluded that all of them were just seeing stars.
None of those pilots saw a star. I know those pilots. I know what their training was, and they were not looking at a star. I don't think this incident has ever been adequately explained.
Today, most UFO sightings are not officially investigated. The government and mainstream scientists have dismissed them. But physicist Michio Kaku warns against that.
You simply cannot dismiss the possibility that some of these UFO sightings are actually sightings from some object created by an advanced civilization. A civilization far out in space, a civilization perhaps millions of years ahead of us in technology. You simply cannot discount that possibility.
It was a UFO, for sure.
It's etched into my brain till the day I die, I guarantee you.
I mean, it is like it just happened yesterday.
I believe that the object that I saw was extraterrestrial.
And where it came from, when it came from, we do not know. I wish we did.
When you look at this handful of cases that cannot be easily dismissed, this is worthy of scientific investigation. Maybe there's nothing there. However, on that off chance that there is something there, that could literally change the course of human history. So I say, let this investigation begin.
The millions of believers are waiting because for them, seeing is believing. And that is our broadcast for tonight. From all of us here at Primetime and ABC News, I'm David Muir. Good night.
I've always believed that there could be something else.
I just believe we're not the only ones in the universe.
I believe that there is other intelligences.
I know UFOs exist because I've seen them. I know entities from elsewhere, who knows where, exist because I've been in contact with them.
There's been no explanation for what we saw that night. It just hangs out there as one of the big question marks.